Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode with Rabbi Moshe Shulman, Debunking the Missionaries. Tonight we're going to discuss how the New Testament is not history. Welcome back, Rabbi. Pleasure always having you on the show. So how are you, Rabbi?
Okay.
Good.
Fine.
Good. Very nice.
Good.
All right, very good. Welcome back.
Let's see the live chat yet, but okay, now it's coming up.
Very good.
Okay.
Awesome.
Now, we're dealing with New Testament's history. We have been doing this all along, of course.
Sure.
The main thing we discussed before is the virgin birth, which took up a lot of time because that's a very major part of it. I may take some questions towards the end, so we might say that keep putting up your number.
Okay.
Probably about quarter to maybe, something like that. See how it works out.
That sounds good. All right.
There are 2 units still left to do before we finish this, and then we'll go into new subjects. I think I'm going to take a few weeks of just answering questions that people might have, and then we'll go back to, as I said, I want to do Isaiah 53, so we'll do that after that. With the Jewish holidays and everything, I don't know what the schedules are going to end up being, with canceled days and stuff like that. So.
Right.
Okay, today what we're going to discuss about the primary historical issue is, one is of extreme importance, and that has to do with the dating of the ministry of John and Jesus, which of course helps us to try and figure out when it was that Jesus was executed. The 2 standard dates that are given are 30 in CE in the Common Era and 33 in the Common Era. 33 is the most used and in a sense is the most problematic. We'll deal with that in a second. So what I want to do is, the New Testament does mention certain events in relationship to the life of Jesus, and so we want to deal with that to try and figure out, okay, when was Jesus teaching, and when was he actually executed? Okay, in order to do this, we're going to discuss about John the Baptist's life and things that we can have so that we can put these together. Next week, what I want to do is, I might start a little bit this week, but next week specifically, in historic, we want to deal with certain information the New Testament gives. Remember, we discussed about how Luke was confused as far as the sacrifices, what had to be done if a woman gave birth to a son. He mixes those together, and also as far as what actually priests did in the temple, which one he confused what was done with the incense that the high priest would give on Yom Kippur, and the type of service which was done daily with the incense offering with the regular priest. So we've already seen some clear instances of errors in historical information there that don't agree with actually biblical things that are going on. So we're going to do a few stories, a few things in the New Testament dealing with things that are historical facts that the New Testament has wrong. And that will bring us to the close of the first issue part of the New Testament. We take the resurrection as part of history, but as a second issue by itself in a different way. The point here, of course, being, as we've done with everything, well, this dealing with the canon, showing how the canon was falsely put together, that books like Hebrews and Revelation should never have been in the first place in the books, and other letters should not have been it. And also, just like we discussed how the text of the New Testament was actually tampered, and so we can't have it reliable. Now we're doing from another point of view, as far as historical, can we rely on these as being historical events? Okay, so let's start here. The first question, the first problem we come up with is, how long was Jesus' ministry? Now, one of the books I use most on this is called Chronological Aspects of the Life of Christ by a fellow named Honer. This is a very excellent book. It actually brings in some of the different arguments. He holds by 33 as being the date of execution. There's a lot of reasons why I disagree with that, but that's besides the point. But one of the things he points out there is in John the Baptist, in the book of John, we have 3 Passovers mentioned. So, for example, the first one is John 2, verse 23, where it says, when he was in Jerusalem during the Passover festival, many believed in his name because they saw the signs that he was doing. Okay? That's the first one. Chapter 6, verse 4. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming to him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread for these people to eat? And the third one is in chapter 11, verse 55. Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to prepare themselves. So we see Passover 1, a lot of number of events occur in between. Passover 2, number of events occur, and Passover 3, and then we come to the events which lead up to the crucifixion. Now, it's also known that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's only one Passover, and that is a Passover that comes before the crucifixion. So, there are a lot of arguments, a lot of ways of trying to figure this out. This is clearly a problem between the two. However, for the moment now, we're going to sort of ignore that. This particular problem between the Synoptics and John, where John has a 3-year ministry, and the Synoptics have only a 1-year ministry. And we're going to assume that those who say it's a 3-year ministry is correct. The reason why is because it helps as far as the dating to sort of push it closer to the period of time that people want it. What do I mean by that? Well, if we say this 3-year ministry, and as we pointed out before, Jesus starts his ministry when he's about 30 years old. So we say Jesus dies when he's about 33 years old. That's the accepted time. So his death at the age of 33, we have to fit in with historical events that we know of and see how it works out, because it has to be in the time of Pilate, who had his position in Judea from 26 to 36. So if we look at it from the first thing, we know there's two ways of looking at it. We can say that Jesus had to have died sometime when Pilate was there. So that gives the earliest time of his birth. So if we assume that Jesus was executed in the first year of Pilate, which would have been 26 CE, that means his ministry started at 23, and he was born 30 years before that. That comes out to the date of 8 BCE. 8 BCE is considered pretty early, but it's a possibility, the realm of possibility. Now, the other way of checking it, of course, is when's the latest Jesus could have been born. Now, the assumption appears to be from Matthew, because it says that Herod was supposedly going to kill the children under 2, that Jesus was at that time under 2. So, if we take that as being at the last year when Herod lived, it could be born anywhere between 6 and 4. So the latest date in which Jesus could have been born would be mamish in the year 4. So that's assuming that the supposed instance, but of course we have no information that ever existed. But let's assume that for the minute. Herod dies 4 BCE. That's the year that Herod tries to kill the children of Bethlehem. That's when Jesus is born. And so we cite that as basically year 0. What comes out from that is 33 years later. "33 years later" makes it 30 CE, Common Era. So if we say that Jesus was born at 4 BCE, and which as the latest date it could have been, and we say he was 33 when he died, that made him execution of 30 CE. That, of course, causes a problem for those who say it's 33 CE, but that's a different issue. We're going to put that on the side for the moment. So we see here, using just the dating thing, that dating Jesus' age, the latest when he could be born, and also the factor of when Pilate came, we see that Jesus has to have been born between 8 BCE and 4 BCE. Okay? Anything outside of that causes problems with the text in the New Testament for Luke and stuff like that. So anytime we see a date coming out of that, like for example, those who are arguing for are arguing for 33 CE as the date of Jesus' execution, either they are not accepting that Jesus was 30 years old at the time, or they're losing out on something else. He was not born in Herod. It was born after Herod died. One of these things has to give, because these are set dates. The death of Herod is known specifically. These are confirmed not just by Josephus and other things, but other outside historians. This is a objective fact. The other and the dates of Pilate are known. They're certain from 26 to 36. So these are dates, historical facts, exclusive from the New Testament that are known to be factual. And then the only thing that we have from the New Testament is basically the age of Jesus when he died, and that's considered somewhere around 33. So we have that range. Now, let's start examining some of the other evidence that we have here. The New Testament does bring various other pointers of time for, again, historical events that are known. These are, we're dealing with historical events that are known outside of that, and in multiple attestations of it in Roman historians and stuff like that. Now, let's look at Luke 3:12. Luke 3:12 gives us an important piece of information. Excuse me, 3:1. I don't know what I wrote through 12 or 3:1. That's a mistake on my note here. Let me just correct my note here. 3:1 gives us some very important information as to Jesus. And let's read what he says. In the 15th year of the reign of Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea, and Herod was ruler of Galilee. Now this is not Herod, who the old one, but Herod, his son, and his brother Philip, ruler of the region of Iturea, and Trachonitis, and Licinius, ruler of Abilene. During the high priest of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zacharias, in the wilderness. So, what we see here is, this now gives us a date of John's ministry. Now remember, John's ministry is very important because we see that Jesus started his ministry after John. Jesus goes to John at the Jordan River to become baptized, which means that John must have been for a certain amount of time doing it. Now remember, John, what we learned out from the beginning of Luke, John is actually about a year or so older than Jesus. So they're contemporaries in age. So John can't be so old. So when this occurs, John's ministry starts sometime then. So we can sort of date when John's ministry was. And remember that John is 1 year older than Jesus. Okay? But it doesn't say his ages, but it does say he was 1 year. We know that he's 1 year older. So we know when Tiberius became emperor. That was in the year 14 CE. So the 15th year is 29 CE. So the question then becomes, when was Jesus baptized in order that he should start his ministry after that? Because that starts the clock for the 3 years. Although it doesn't seem very likely that Jesus would come the first year, because remember, John not only had to do that, but he had to start to become very famous. It's clear from the New Testament and outside from Josephus that it's not just that John was somebody baptizing people by the river. He was a very well-known person. It's not like today where you have television and stuff like that. The person who starts doing that, it takes a while for him to be known. It probably takes a few years. But we're going for the moment just to ignore the fact that Jesus comes to him. We'll assume that Jesus came in his first year, even though that doesn't really, it doesn't seem logical. It would seem that Jesus could not have come before their third or fourth year, because it would certainly take a certain amount of time before people became aware, oh, there's somebody named John who's a very righteous and holy person there, and he's baptizing people in the water, until it became well enough known that people should know about it. But we will ignore that issue at the moment, because we want to really make it as short as possible to try and see if we can fit any of the datings that we have here. We're trying to be as nice as we can. Okay? So that would mean that Jesus started his ministry in the year 29. And if we take John being 3 years that he started, that means that Jesus would have been executed in the year 32. Okay? Now, we have a problem with that year, as we said before, if Jesus was baptized in the year 29. And let's say John started ministry in 29, and Jesus was baptized in the year 29 also. He was one of his first people there, although that doesn't really seem to fit the popularity. And we'll know how well known John was, since John was so very well known. And as we'll see, he gets executed very quickly after that. Had to be very well known. It's too short amount of time really to assume that Jesus would have. As Jesus could have had, Jesus could have associated and started his things that close to the beginning, but we'll assume that for a moment. So let's say that would be year 29. Jesus was 30 when he started. That means that if we count back from the year 29, 30 years early is 2 BCE. It's too late. Jesus had to have been born before that, which means that if we say that Jesus came to him in his first year, which is a very early, we could make it, then Jesus' birth is too late. If we say it's in the second, third year, it becomes even further and further away. Okay? For example, if it's in the second year, then Jesus had to be born 1 BCE. If it's the third year, it has to be 1 CE. I mean, it becomes further and further away from the time when Herod died. And if we're going to maintain that Jesus' death occurred in the time of Herod, we're going to have a problem. Or we would have to say that when the New Testament says that Jesus was 30, that's wrong. Either way, there's something historically wrong going on here. Now again, that's assuming that Jesus comes to him the first year. There's indications and reasons to believe that Jesus did not go to him the first year. There are reasons to believe not to go. One of them is one of them is because we find that Jesus, when John was in prison, Jesus was doing his ministry. So John was at the end of his ministry when Jesus was still ministering, which means that John could not have had a ministry of more than a couple of years. And yet he was so famous and so important that what he said caused his own execution. Now, why was he executed? Let's see when the death of John the Baptist is, because John the Baptist's death tells us also when Jesus' ministry is. Now, according to Homer, in this book that I was talking about, he dates the execution of John the Baptist to the second year of the 3 years of Jesus' ministry. So if Jesus' ministry started in the year 29, if John's ministry started and Jesus also started in 29, then it would be between 30 and 31. In that time was when John would have been executed. Okay. Now we're going to find there's a problem with that. But let's first establish what's the important thing of the relationship with John the Baptist and Jesus. And there's a few places where we find this discussed. This comes up. In relation to John the Baptist and, of course, the death of John the Baptist. In Matthew chapter 14, verse 1. Let me read the whole story as it appears here. At that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus. Now, Herod is the one who was ruler in the Galilee. Okay? John the Baptist was working in the Galilee just as Jesus came to Galilee. Nazareth is an area of Israel called the Galilee. Those of you in Israel know the Galilee is the northern area. It's called the Galilee. That's where Herod ruled. This is how he ruled. And he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. For this reason, his powers are at work in him." Okay? So when Jesus came about, Herod thought that it was actually John the Baptist who had been killed. For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. Because, okay, now this is a very important thing. Herod married his brother's Philip's wife. Because John had been telling him, it is not lawful for you to have her. John married his brother's wife. Now, apparently he had children with her, so that the idea of Levirate marriage would not apply here. And so marrying your brother's wife, who's already had children, is forbidden in the Torah. So John the Baptist told him you're not allowed to do it. Though Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised an oath to grant her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, Herodias, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." Why did she want that? Obviously, because John the Baptist was going around saying that their marriage was illegal. The king was grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for his guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison. The head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took the body and buried it, and then they went and told Jesus. So here we see that Jesus is in his ministry, and in the middle of that, John the Baptist is executed. So that's why Honer says it's in the second year of Jesus' ministry. Okay, now let's see what Mark says about this. Chapter 6, 14 through 20, on the issue here. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Now, this is very important. Remember, just because a person lived a time, it takes a while for a person to become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason the powers are at work in him. So again, Jesus' ministry, however long you say, part of it at least is after John the Baptist has been executed. So if we can pinpoint when John the Baptist was executed, that means that Jesus' ministry, Jesus died either 1, 2, or 3 years later. Minimum 1, probably 2 or 3. Okay? But others said it's Elijah, and others said it's a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. So Herod from Galilee thinks that this is John the Baptist. So we're dealing, again, the ministry of Jesus, while it starts sometime, continues after John the Baptist dies, is executed. Very important, because we're going to find out when John the Baptist was executed. And we'll see the problems that come from that. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Again, this is the biblical text. There's no real issue about that. If you look up that you are not allowed to marry your brother's wife, the only exception would be if they didn't have children together. There's something called the Levirate marriage, which he knew. And Herodias had a grudge against and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, here it says a little bit different. Herodias was daughters of Herodias and daughter Herodias came in. By the way, it would not be a problem if they both had the same name. That is just like Herod then was the son of Herod. It was not unusual then. Then she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you even half of my kingdom. Those of you who have read the book of Esther, sounds very familiar. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Why? She was very upset because he said that her marriage was illegitimate. Immediately she rushed back to the king. I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for guests, He did not want to refuse. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring him John's head. He went and beheaded him in prison and brought it on a platter and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to the mother. When his disciples heard what happened, they came and took the body with them. Okay. Same story, basically. Again, the New Testament seems to be saying that Jesus has a ministry, John's in prison at the same time. After John's executed, John's executed and Jesus' ministry. And then we'll see that John actually has a little bit different. They sent to ask John the Baptist about Jesus. So it seems that Jesus' ministry starts before John goes into prison. John goes into prison and Jesus' ministry goes afterwards. Again, it works very good when you have 3 years. If you have 1 year, it's a lot of stuff to pack into 1 year. But that's not the problem with the historian. Okay, let's do what Luke says. And we'll do a little bit about John. And then we'll start going into what really is the problem here. Okay, Luke 9:7-9. Now, Howard heard all about taking place and was perplexed because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead. By some that Elijah had appeared. It said, "Her said, John, I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things?" And he tried to see him. Okay. Luke has it very short, but it's basically similar. Okay. Now I want to look at John. The book of John has a little bit more about John the Baptist. So in John 19-28, the book of John talks about how people sent to John to baptize, to ask him who he was. And he said, "I'm not the Messiah, I'm not Elijah, I'm not even a prophet, but I'm the one who's calling out in the wilderness." Okay, I'm just... Then, of course, this crazy question which makes no sense. Why are you baptizing? Doesn't have to be special, whatever. And he announces that somebody called is going to come after him. The next day, Jesus comes and is immersed. Okay. Then in chapter 3, 22-30, we have a little bit more. Now, here's where we find out, according to John, after this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean country and spent some time. John also was baptizing in Aenon, near Salem, and people kept him. John, of course, had not yet been thrown into prison. Now, a discussion about purification arose between John's disciple and a Jew. They came to John and said, "Rabbi, the one who was with you across the Jordan, whom you have here, he is baptized, and all are going to him." John answered, "No one can receive anything except from heaven," etc., etc. So we see here that Jesus goes to John. Jesus has a ministry with John before he's in prison. He's in prison, he's executed, and then Jesus' ministry continues. Now, why is this a problem? The problem is, when was John executed? Okay? Now, if we use a 3-year instead of the 1-year system from the book of John, which is what we're going to use here, okay? During that 3 years, Jesus was doing stuff. He gets baptized by John. He ministers. John is then in prison. John's then executed, and Jesus continues like that. So it looks pretty good. What Honer says, as it could be the second year in the middle. It makes sense. I'm not going to argue with that because I don't think in the end it doesn't affect what the real problems are. What we do see here is the question is, okay, we know that Jesus. What's important to realize is the factual information that we have from all sources is that Jesus ministers and is executed after John the Baptist was executed. Now, in the New Testament we read tonight, we know the reason why Herod executed him. Herod executed him because he took Philip's wife, Herodias. So the question is, when did this occur? Okay. For this, we need to go into Josephus. Because here we see certain events. Okay. So the first place we want to look at is the 18th book of Antiquities, chapter 4 and paragraph 6. Let me get to that. Now, what we're going to find here is, remember that Herod took his brother's wife. He took her after he died. Philip was originally married to Herodias. Philip dies, and Herod takes her as his wife. So the question we need to ask is, okay, John the Baptist could not have been executed before that event occurred. So the question is, when did Peter die so that Herod could marry his wife and cause all the problems? Okay, that's the important one. When did he die? So, in Josephus, we have it explicitly. About this time it was that Philip, Herod's brother, departed this life in the 20th year of the reign of Tiberius. Okay. Now, Herodias, therefore, is not available to Herod to marry until the 20th year of Tiberius. Now, if you remember, Tiberius became emperor in 14. 20 years later is 34. So, John the Baptist could not have even started to talk about against Herod until the year 34. Not until then. Okay? Which means that he is eventually executed, and then Jesus has, according to Harn and others, at least a year or so more later in his thing. So let's see. So how do we know that that is the case? If we look in the next chapter, chapter 5, after this time, talking about what happened just before, being that Philip dies, Aretas, the king of Arabia Patia, and Herod had a quarrel on the account following. What was the quarrel about? Herod the Tetrarch had married the daughter of Aretas and had lived with her a great while. And when he was once at Rome, he lodged with Herod, who was his brother indeed, but not by the same mother, for this Herod was Simon's daughter. However, he fell in love with Herodias, this last Herod's wife. This is Herod Philip, I think he had both those names, who was the daughter of Skobac, their brother, and the sister of Agrippa the marriage. This man ventured to talk to her about a marriage between them, in which a despot had admitted an agreement was made with her to challenge her habits. Okay. So what happened? Is after that is when the whole marriage and the whole situation, Josephus is going to talk here about how a war came about it, but all of this occurred afterwards. Now, one thing that's One thing that is interestingly mentioned here is that Herod actually lived with her for a while. So we don't know how long it was. We don't really know how long it was until, the whole incident with John started about. But we know that they lived together for a while. Now, what comes out from this? What happens is, eventually, Herod Antipas, which was the name of Herod, who was Philip's brother, Herod Antipas got into a war with Aretas because he had divorced her daughter, his daughter. This caused an anger between them. The story is told in here. This caused an anger to occur, and eventually a war, and eventually Herod Antipas actually lost the war. And the reason they said he lost the war is because he killed John the Baptist. But all this is occurring after 34. After 34. So how does this now affect the chronology? Remember, we pointed out earlier that for Jesus, he could not have been, if we are true about the age of Jesus when he died, he could not have been executed any later than 30. But according to this, we have a number of things which causes problems. Number one, John the Baptist started his ministry in the year 29. And if Jesus has a 3-year ministry, that pushes his birth date too late. But 34, if you take 33 years away from 34, or it's 34, say he's executed a year or something late. So let's say 35, 36. That pushes his birth date into the common era, if 33 is correct. So either the 33 date is wrong, or Jesus is born too late and makes the whole story. You cannot recognize. There's so much a conglomeration of problems here that you cannot recognize with synoptic dates and what we have with the historical stuff. We cannot make these dates work. We cannot have Jesus born in 4 BCE, get executed after John the Baptist executed in 34, and still be in his young 30s. If Jesus dies in 35, from 4 to 35 is 38 years. Pretty difficult. As you know, that anybody who's learned knows that most people will say that Jesus died in 33. Now, so that means that we put Jesus' death sometime around 34, 35. If it's in the second year, somebody who has a second year and the third year, 2 years, so it's the second year is 34, and well, it can't be before 34, so we have to figure maybe a little bit later is when it is. So we're talking 35, 36. It's got to be before 36. So you're basically pushing Jesus' execution in order to try and fit everything that we have here to, it's got to be like 36, otherwise it's no longer Pilate. So the latest you can put is 36, but again, the problem with that is if you make it 36, you have Jesus being too old. Much older than the saying that he was 30 years when he started. Now, there is a little bit of a way out of that. But again, what it is, the way out of it introduces a new contradiction into the historical record about Jesus' life. Okay? That new contradiction is if we look at the book of John, chapter 8, verse 57. Now, this is, I think, about the third year of ministry. Then the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" Now, what are they saying? Usually when you talk to somebody about a certain age younger, for example, if you're in 30s, if you're not yet 40, or if you're in your 40s, you're not yet 50. So by saying that he's in his not yet 50 is sort of indicating that he's in his 40s. Now, if we put Jesus in his somewhere in his 40s, okay, instead of 33, make him 43. With the execution at 36 is what we're coming out to do. 43 and 36 makes it 11 BCE. That's much too early. That's very early. We can't fit it into everything else like that. So, again, the problem here is now when we try to reconcile the ages, the age of Jesus, with the ministry that we know of John the Baptist, things which are pegged to historical events, we have a problem. Because we cannot make them all fit correctly. There's something wrong. The history is not right. We cannot, this says this time, this is, all of these dates just contradict and cause all kinds of different problems. If Jesus was 33, then all these dates get off and they're too early, too late. They never fit in to anything. So either you have to throw out the 30, that Jesus was in his 30s takes it later, like John or something like that. Even John becomes a little bit too late. All of these things tell us that basically we don't have a clue. We don't know when Jesus was born. We have ideas because of Herod, but we don't know exactly when it is. The census that we looked in Luke is a census in 6 CE, and there's no real possibility, unless possibly it's referring to something else. The census there is so garbled, the historical information there, but if there was a census, it's very hard to put it together. We really do not know when Jesus was born and when Jesus died. And as I said when we started talking about historical information in the New Testament, that's not the case with Tiberius. We know when Tiberius was born, Tiberius died. He was emperor at the same time. We know a lot about a lot of different people, but we don't know about Jesus. You know, you hear all the time that Jesus' life is one of the most documented and stuff like that. But the truth of the matter is that's not really the case. We don't know when he was born, and we don't know for sure when he died. We have certain indicators of when it could be, but there's so many other factors in the New Testament, so many things that are so contradictory and that we don't really know. It's almost as if it says, well, we know Jesus lived, but we have to build up a mythology around him as to when these events occurred in order to make it work. And that's basically one of the problems in the New Testament historically. We don't know, the dates are not reliable. We don't really know. It's more mythological than historical. Okay, I think I'd like to add questions now. Next week we're going to deal with a little bit more historical stuff.
All right.
But I would rather do some questions right now and just leave that for next week. So, and then after that we'll probably do some questions for a few weeks in a row. So let me just check what's here. Maybe we'll look out and there's some nice questions here.
Okay, very good. I'm going to go put the
I'm going to start at the top. Shalom to everybody. Said shalom to me. Future. Hi. Is it possible Jesus was a composite of several people? Okay. There's no way of proving it. Okay. Now we could sit back and we could speculate on all kinds of things. I have my own speculations about such things also. But essentially, the answer is no way of knowing. No way of knowing. We can look at the historical information. We see that there's problems. One of the issues that causes a problem, of course, is we may have mentioned it before when we were talking about Jesus outside of the New Testament. They point to the Talmud about someone there that even some rabbis think is referring to Jesus. The problem is that this person lived well over 100 years before the time Jesus was supposed to have lived in the first century, the early first century. So the problem with that is, well, if this is the right person, then the New Testament chronology is wrong. So is it possible that, there's somehow certain things mixed up? I mean, there are certain things in the story. For example, the Jesus in the New Testament goes down to Egypt. The person mentioned in the Talmud, having lived 100 or so years, also went to Egypt. But that's in an historical thing where we know the people, the rabbi, the Pharisees, that fled to Egypt because of persecution. And then they came back later on. So there's a historical event, whereas Jesus going down was because of an event that never could occur. So is it possible that some stories from this one and some stories from this one were put together? It's possible. I mean, we could speculate in all kinds of things. I will not go on a limb and say, yeah, that's what happened. But yeah, it's possible. It's quite possible. I mean, when you have things so garbled and mixed up like that, the possibility of other things seeping in exists. I mean, that's true. It's just we can't say. What we can say is that the New Testament is not history. It's mythological history, historical fiction. I mean, there's events and people there that are true, but when you really examine and say, okay, let me just see if I can write a chronology about it, you can't do it. And this Holner book is a perfect example of it. He comes up with his own chronology, but if you see what he has to go through in order to get to it, it becomes a problem. Okay, let's see if there are any more questions. Apostle Paul asks, is it not possible that Jesus was born in the first year of the Common Era? Well, of course he could have been born there, but the problem is that, again, the problem with that is very simple. Matthew and Luke indicate that Jesus' birth was in the time of Herod the Great. And Herod the Great, we know historically, Josephus and also external things, we know for sure that he died in 4 BCE. So with that being the case, I mean, yeah, you could say he was born in 1 CE, but then what you have to do is what are you going to do with Luke and Matthew? They place it a certain period of time that doesn't fit with your chronology. It just becomes more and more of a mess historically. I mean, it is a mess historically. We don't know when he was born, really. Because we don't really know for sure he was born. If we assume that it was Herod, because it appears in 2 books, scholars just say that book. So maybe he was born time, then it puts him in 4 BCE at least, if not earlier than that. The problem again is and the whole purpose of what I'm doing with it is to say, listen, the New Testament is not historical. If you look at the New Testament of historical events, it's not there. And I'm not just talking about the saints dancing after the resurrection. I'm not talking about something like that. I'm talking just plain simply factual thing. We know when Tiberius became king, and we know when based on what it says there, in Luke, then we know that when John the Baptist was supposed to be starting ministry, that would have been in the year 29. But we also know that John the Baptist was executed somewhere around the year 34. So where does Jesus fit into all this? I don't know. It's contradictory. There's no way of putting it in. You can try and bend and things like that, but the truth of the matter is there's no way of putting it in. You cannot say that this is a chronology. It's much like what's being done, what gets done if you see a lot of things about, they try to harmonize the Gospels. So you see sometimes the harmonies of Gospels having events and stories like this, rather than just admitting, yeah, these people wrote things down and there were errors. Okay, there's errors. Just deal with it. Okay, let's go see who else asked the question. There's very good questions, by the way. Very, very good questions. Tells me you people are listening. Possibly 6 months old. Yeah, probably 6 months. I said a year, but you're right, because after all, Elizabeth was pregnant, and Mary was also pregnant at the same time. So I think 6 months is probably pretty much, it was older is a thing, so. Golem says there's no record of Jesus from that time. That's absolutely true. There is none. The closest thing that you get, of course, is I talk about Josephus, that I don't believe that anything in Josephus is really from Josephus. But worst case, the best case they have is basically Josephus talks about somebody, but you don't really know much because you don't really know what they actually, what they added. that people like F.F. Bruce and Darrell Buchan agree that there were things added to it. Evangelicals agree that there were things added, but you don't know what was taken out, so you don't really know what was there. If you remember, what I did is I made up a made-up report of Josephus, putting back in things that they might have cut out, but we don't really know. So at best, you could say that Josephus says, well, there was some person at Jesus that lived sometime around then. But other than that, you really don't know. And again, I am not arguing that Jesus didn't exist. I mean, there are people who believe that Jesus didn't exist at all, whatever. That's not what my argument is, of course. I believe that Jesus did exist, and the primary reason is because our rabbis did not question it. And since they didn't question it, and I'm not willing to argue that it didn't exist. I will accept also that Jesus did. Okay, let's see anything more. Golem, yes. Again, the majority of scholars, I will admit, believe that the text has some truth to it. It was just a lot of things added to it. My view is much more strict on that. I lean toward those who say it was either completely fabricated or we don't have the real information of what he really wrote about Jesus, because Jesus comes out positive in Josephus, and so we don't know what was really there. So, what you can't prove, you can't prove. Okay, I'm not trying to, push opinions. I'm trying to say, okay, this is what we know for a fact, and this is what we don't know. Okay. It's clear that the New Testament is not historical. We cannot put the chronology, when we start dealing with the issues of John the Baptist, and then we take the Indian from the birth of Jesus, we try and put this, we just cannot come with the time when Jesus died. Actually, Jesus wrote in Greek specifically. One of his things he mentions that he wrote specifically for the Greeks. Antiquities was specifically written for the Romans. I actually disagree with Bart Ehrman. I disagree with Bart Ehrman. He contends that Josephus is actually writing about Jesus there, and I contend that either he didn't, or even if you have to say he did, we don't really know what he wrote, because anything negative that had been written about Jesus would have been taken out anyways. So we don't really know. Jesus, King of Odessa's book has more historical facts than any of the studies. I have no idea what that is, but I know that there is supposedly a forgery of something that Jesus supposedly wrote to the King of Odessa, if I remember correctly, and that's known to be a forgery. So what I think comes from that is not. Future Chai, the myth maker. I'm not 100% sure about that at the moment. I have some theories about that I'm not going to talk about now. I'm arguing it out with some people now that sort of disagrees with it. Clearly it must be recognized that things in the New Testament, whether by Paul or whatever, they cannot be considered history like we talk about history now. Okay, so there's going to be things there. I mean, Paul says it was a Pharisee of Pharisees. I don't believe that very much. Okay, saying it was a Pharisee is like you said, it was an Orthodox Jew, which, maybe he was. Just because in Jasper doesn't mean he wasn't Orthodox. But the Pharisee, I don't believe that. For the same reason why I don't believe that Josephus, who also considers himself refers to himself as the most learned from Pharisees. There's reasons in autobiography to not believe that to be the case. Which New Testament does the rabbi prefer? Well, since I don't know Greek, I can't take a preference as far as that's concerned. For the Hebrew, the translations, the Christian translations, I like the King James Version, even though I know there are some times that he mistranslates things, but grammatically he does a very good job. I like his grammatical constructions, even when he does mistranslations, as far as that's concerned. Are the New Testament quotes of John the Baptist even true? I don't know. John the Baptist is a legitimate historical figure. In fact, he was an important historical figure. Josephus mentions him. Okay, that Josephus mentions him is a good indication that he was a pretty important person. Certainly, there's much more in Josephus about John the Baptist than there is of Jesus, so that sort of gives you an idea of whatever stature it would be. Apostle John was executed by a Gentile. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't know what you're talking about. Steve Angel. Yeah, Bart Ehrman actually wrote a whole book on did Jesus exist, and he agrees. He says that he believes for many reasons that he did. I also believe, I don't agree with all of his reasons, but I believe that fundamentally that it's very hard to argue that the person didn't exist. Saying that he existed does not mean saying that the New Testament is historical. So I'm pointing out now, New Testament is not historical. There's a lot of errors in it. That's a given, but it does not necessarily mean that the person didn't exist. Herod Antipas, J.I.B. Herod Antipas was a son of Herod, and Herod was an Edomian convert. There's a lot of issues about that. See, again, the issue about the book of Josephus is not really, it's a question of just looking at the text, does it really fit in and stuff like that. It was not added to support the Trinity. That is not true. There's nothing from Josephus in any version of it whatsoever that you take that could be found to be any kind of a help for the Trinity. Even in the most, even if you take all those things that most scholars, even Christian scholars, believe weren't there, if you take the most liberal additions of adding to it, you still don't have anything about Jesus being God incarnate or anything like that. Okay. Apostle Paul, if you say he was born the first year, I mean, fine. I don't know where you get that from. It just, unfortunately, if you say he was born the first year, then you're denying basically what it says in Matthew and Luke, that he was born during the time of Herod. That's all. So, hey, listen, if you want to do it, it's fine. Yes, he was born on Christmas. Of course he was born on Christmas. What? We have his birthday every year. What are you talking about? Actually, BC and CE, that's very interesting. You have to understand something. BCE and CE are later changes. They counted the years differently then. For example, the Jewish years were referred to what Minhaj Studas. We count the Jewish year from creation, but in the Second Temple time, they had what's called Minhaj Studas, from the counting of the star is like a documents. Which I believe started like after the Persian period or something like that. But so they had a continuous thing. Reckoning historical dates and stuff like that is well known in history. But pretty much we know that in fact Herod died what we call now 4 BCE, which is all that's important. BCE, these are all artificial. I mean, for example, in Islam they have another dating system. Tim Otis about that contradiction. I hope in Mirz Hashem, in the future, to give a long, in-depth discussion, series of classes on the Trinity, from the point of view of the Orthodox churches, the Catholic, who gave us the creeds, going to Nicaea and Chalcedon, to understand what these things are, what these things mean, why they would think it eliminates certain problems and why it doesn't, and then from the biblical text also to deal with our evangelical friends. I do hope to give something like that. I have most of the stuff written out as is anyways, but again, I feel that there's certain things that are important. Our main goal is, of course, to be able to do it in Dr. Brown's book. Trinity is something very important, so I will go through it, because basically I have not seen anywhere the in-depth treatment of the Trinity from somebody who can explain why it's wrong. That's necessary. The Trinity is the most serious problem to Christianity today. That's just the way it is. I mean, there's a book written by a guy named Anthony Buzzard, who refers, I don't remember what the name of the book is offhand, but it's something like, the biggest error in Christianity is the Trinity. But that needs a number of things to explain in order to understand what the Trinity is. 90% plus of people you speak to, even evangelicals, have no clue what the Trinity is, what it means, what it indicates, where it comes from. They don't know about the Cappadocian Fathers, from whom we have actually. If you don't know what the Cappadocian Fathers say, you have no clue what the Trinity means. Okay, they were the ones who came up with all the ideas which come down to us today from the Trinity. And even evangelicals who use different language from what you find in Orthodox churches really are just saying over the same types of things that the Cappadocian Fathers.
Oh boy.
Well, why? Because it wasn't very important. I know the time is almost up. I think I have almost everybody here.
Yeah, we hit an hour. That's good.
I know. I just want to see if there's any more questions. There were a lot of nice questions this week.
Yeah, a lot of attention here for sure.
Yeah. That tells me you're listening.
Very good.
I'm almost at the end. Yeah. JB, Irenaeus believed that Jesus lived to be about the age 50 because of what I pointed out in John. It says he was almost 50 years old and then he gets executed a couple years later. So he has on what to do it. But the problem is again, my whole point here is that historically we don't know. We just don't know. There's a lot of things people talk about. He was 33 years old when he died and stuff like that. Supporters because Luke said he was another 30. All these things here. But when you look into the history, when you look into the New Testament, and you compare it to the things that they peg with history, he's in this year and this year, this, you just have problems. It just doesn't work out. And it's just a problem with it. That's all there is to it. Well, there's just so many things on here. Yeah, Sir Anthony is a very nice guy. Yeah, thanks, Derby. It's called The Doctrine of Trinity, Christianity's Self-Inflicted Wound by Anthony Buzzard, somebody else. Okay, I think that I figured everything else.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
So I didn't have to take phone calls. Again, next week we're going to do some more interesting things that you're going to find.
Okay.
And, we will, take questions either by phone or, what's in here. I'll try and answer what I can. And then I want to do a couple of weeks because of the Jewish holidays. I don't want to. Maybe I should just do through the Jewish holidays, just call-in shows. You haven't had them for a while. And answering questions is very nice. It's kind of fun.
All right, we'll definitely have to pinpoint the schedule for everybody, and not just with your show, but with Rabbi Singer.
Yeah, we should also tell everybody, if I'm going to do questions, we should tell like a week ahead so that people come with some good questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay,
well, good deal.
I think that's the wrap for tonight.
All right, well, you guys have a great evening, Rabbi. Thank you for everybody, and we will see. We'll see y'all tomorrow for a few more shows. And meanwhile, subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on notifications, and we will see you soon. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay, bye-bye.
תמיד כולם ביחד חשוב